today's fireside chat, where we discuss some tricky questions that you may have come across, some scenarios which you don't find a solution to, and you would like to ask here. We'll all try to answer these questions, and perhaps we can just get going with the first one if you have. And I would love you to, switch on your cameras and perhaps a more together mode than a, board meeting kinds would be better. But hey,
Actually, the together mode in recording doesn't work correct nicely, I think. Or we can try at this session. I haven't tried it, but let's try for this session then.
I guess we were just playing, so that's fine. Any questions? Yes, we have some from the community, and we can start with some of those. I'm picking questions at random. Can we inherit from the STL? Is it a good idea, and why? What would you say if you are asked this question? So I guess they are talking about some containers, right? Because STL is not only containers, but I guess that's the idea of this question. Okay, Neil has an answer. Thank you very much for typing it. Looks like you are not available on the microphone or video. I'll read it out. No public inheritance, perhaps private inheritance from containers. And does anybody see why one would say that?
Okay, I am there on the mic, so.
Oh, you have.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, one obvious reason is that the destruction part, right? So because most of these functions, I mean, none of these functions are virtual in the container. So you can't use once if you inherit them. So you usually violate the usual inheritance thing, right? That if you're inheriting from a base class, so then the base function should be virtual. At least the destructor should be virtual. So that's not there. So best is to use it by private inheritance, because public inheritance is mostly modeling the is-a relationship, right? But private inheritance, I mean, it models the uses-a relationship better. So you can, you're sort of creating a wrapper around the container, yet you get access to the container's methods. So I've seen that I've sometimes done that actually, like the STD stack, right? So it doesn't provide direct access to its underlying container, right? But let's say you want the access, so and it exposes that as a protected data member. So the best way to go around that is just inherit from it privately, so you have access to the container, and then you can at least, like, let's say just a simple task of printing the container elements, so you can do those kind of stuff. So private inheritance is usually that's why it's preferred, because yeah, it models the semantics in a better fashion. And anyway, public inheritance has its own pitfalls, the destruction part mostly. I mean, that's I think the topmost priority that I would attach. Why I would stay away from public inheritance from STL containers.
Very true. Yeah, I guess I would totally agree with what you're saying here. Any other thoughts or ideas?
I would usually limit the the use of these kind of constructs, like inheriting from containers. I mean, the use cases, probably I haven't seen much of these use cases where you need to inherit from them. You can mostly get away with composition, just having them as your private members. So yeah, so But yeah, for the rare use cases where you need those kind, because yeah, C++ allows you to do that. So yeah, I think private inheritance is the way to go for those limited niche cases.
Yeah, public will lead to problems because um, you might just delete or destroy the base part and never
Right.
your add-on part. And if there is any management there, that will be a problem. Perfect. Okay, good start. Anything else on this point? Anybody? I guess on a related point, I remember a friend had asked me about what is the way to have something. I think it was a map-like interface uh, on my class, and what is the best way to do it. And so if you go for composition, which is what we are preferring here, all the APIs, the functions of that class will not be available as is in your class, right? So that's a big problem because, with all this template trickery, if you happen to become a template deriving from the map, and you don't have the same level of functions and the standard libraries taking care of automatic conversions, etc. And if we are not handling the same, then the use might not be the same, or it might give you some other performance penalties. So it was a tricky thing to decide how to go about that. Does any of you have you got my problem, and you have any alternate thoughts on that?
So essentially, if I understand it right, you were trying to create an object that's a proxy for a map.
Yeah, so let's say a cached, it's not a cached, let's say some yeah, cached database. So the database is huge and you don't want to keep on iterating, but the top entries you want to keep something like that. So that was a little add-on on what the data structure already was providing. So I guess we were really torn on making the choice here on how to go about it. Inheritance would give us all the functions of the base class into our class. We love it. And that's where it should go. But if you wanted to hook, let's say the insert of it, or the remove, then or the erase, I'm sorry. So then it would need you to be somewhere in the path, your class, to trap the recently released entry which you keep in cache or release or whatever. So that was a problem.
Yeah, I think it would be difficult to have your own class as a drop-in replacement for the entire STL container. So yeah, I mean, I think that's difficult actually.
So I guess if we make sure that our use is not really polymorphic, in which we don't delete with the base pointer of that map, but we are able to use the map as map for, let's say, read-only purposes, but not for write purposes, which was where this functionality was needed. It would be difficult still, but it can be achieved in that fashion. That's a place where you would maybe have if you need the extensive APIs of the underlying container, then inheritance is the way, rather than rekeying everything and making a mistake and so, pessimizing or something. All right. Okay, good. Are there any questions?
On a related note, I think another interesting discussion that I have is when is it fine to have something in the STD namespace, and when is it not fine? So That's an interesting discussion I have with people. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
People, should we write things in the STD namespace? That's the question. What do you think about that?
Since there's silence, maybe I'll kick it off.
Yeah.
So, one use case is STD hash. If you are implementing, like sometimes we need, like I remember one use case where we needed to have a map of a pair, like of an int and some custom class that we had, right? So obviously that won't work out of the box because map relies on having all the members as hashable, right? So you would need to provide your own hash function, and that std that needs to be in the std namespace, whatever you're writing your own hash. So
You sure?
I think so, yes. That needs to be in the std namespace. I might be wrong then. Then if I've done that, then I'll go back and I'll have to take a relook.
Yeah.
But
The
yeah, I think
default
that's
is to
one of the.
try. Yeah, the default thing that the containers would do would be to try STD hash with your type. Uh, but I think it'll come back with some uh, template errors where it was not found. Amir, you were saying something?
No, I was just saying that I would not go with the like polluting in the standard namespace, because then what might happen is if any new person is coming into the team, right? He might assume that it's there in the standard. So it's better to keep the things which are coming from the compiler or the standard from the standard language library per se, to keep that separate from an application or whatever, logic you're putting. But that's just me coming from code maintenance kind of side. Uh, that's my.
In my thought, I wonder why you would have a problem if a person thinks it's there in the standard. Because whatever you implemented, let's say you implemented a STD hash for your pair, and if the guy thinks it's there in the standard and you'll get for free, and in the same code base she is using it, it's fine, I guess. There's a personal knowledge gap, perhaps. Uh,
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
should be, yeah.
But yes, I think I agree with the speaker that it needs some bit of education so that people just
Yeah.
don't go willy-nilly adding everything to the STD namespace.
Other thing which comes in my mind, not sure whether it's correct or not. So you are implementing something in the STD namespace, and due to that, some of the function getting hide behind that, and when the uh, uh, basically the lookups happens, and where you don't want your function to get called, there your function is getting called accidentally, right? Because of might be a ordering of header files and something like that, right? The standard header files are below your header file is on top of that. So something that might happen. This is just theoretical. I haven't come up any use case where it was mandatory for me to write something and pollute the std namespace. So I haven't thought about that.
I think as a standard practice, you might have Marshall Cloud, who maintains the STL, the standard library. Um, would say, I guess, I remember maybe he said something like this, that you should not add to the STD. And I guess we are not supposed to use STD namespace and extend it. We have some mechanisms as an alternate here, which is ADL. So if you are using the STD with your types and you have implemented something uh, related to your type, let's say in your case, the exact example that we were taking so far was std hash of your type. So if you have your own implementation of std hash of your type in your own same namespace as the type, then it will be found first, then the std hash. And that's the way to go about it. And
I think
I
that
have,
was
yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
so that was it's one. I remember when I was interviewing in early days, this was one of the question which was asked me that he showed me some code base where it was I was mentioning that whenever you are writing or calling some function from std, you should always qualify it with like std copy or something like that, right? And then he told me, let's say take a use case of this EDL. If you write directly their std copy, right? The problem is now
You
ADL
have
will
this.
not kick in. Yeah. So yeah, this was an eye opener for me. Yes. Yeah. Sometime you don't have to blindly go and write everywhere STT. If you
Uh,
you know
Excuse me. Sorry, I really joined late. I had some meeting, so really sorry about it. So are you saying that we should not use that? We should use namespace std, or are you saying not to use? What was the context? Sorry, I missed out that part.
Yeah, we'll repeat. The question is,
Yeah.
uh, uh, how do we feel about implementing something in the std namespace?
Okay. Okay. Okay.
and
Great.
yeah. And then it went into now that that how the ADL kicks in before calling STD functions. So what I was talking about is when this STL is implemented, let's say inside for example map, it is using this hash function. There it will not have been called like a STD hash, it will be called as just a hash there, so that the ADL can kick in there.
Okay, good. So, and just to, this is something which I have done often, and I don't know if this is the right way. Somebody can tell me if you have a different opinion. What I've done is, for example, I want to print a vector. The vector is a vector of pairs. Okay, and I just want to print and debug or whatever. So I implement the operator in direction. Okay, less than the std out operator, output operator, I should say, uh, for a vector, and uh, and it's the standard vector, but the way I would have implemented it would be I take a t and I handle the operator for for o string and a vector of t. Okay, and then I'm able to handle uh, the std out of a vector. Like I would print all the entries with comma separated or something like that. And if that's a pair, then I would have to implement a pair o string operator for the pair, which is the t of the vector. And so that I would implement, and it would print two entries within a bracket or something like that. And I've kept these things in global namespaces. I don't know if it is the right place to do. I think it can be in the place in the namespace that you use, that you are in. But if you have different namespaces using this functionality, um, is there is this something that you have done? Like you want to see all the entries of a vector, and it is an STD thing, and you implement the operator, output operator for it, indirection operator.
Yes, I do it every time. Like I come from Python background, so I had just started C++ for competitive programming. So yeah, I always have to do it.
Okay. So you're talking about any production or competitive programs?
No, I am like in my final year of my college,
Okay.
university. Yeah,
So you're talking about getting things done fast and quick, and
yeah, yeah.
okay, yeah. In those things you use these.
Like
Perfect.
in Python, we just have the sprint function, and everything has a like we call it dunder method, underscore string. So that basically gives the string representation of any object. Basically, yeah, the string. So in C++, I found it very difficult to get such a thing. So like after like asking on this IRC from people, I got this way.
What you said reminded me of something else which I had thought while the question came up and we didn't get to it. There are some symbols which we must not use. Okay, and those are the symbols which we should not use macros, not define any macros for, and even generally, I guess, even in our naming and symbols, we cannot use something starting with underscore and a capital letter or an underscore small letter. These are tokens reserved totally by the standard. And as users, we should not use these kind of symbols. This is another way where you can mess up with the standard library. Let's say you say hash define underscore struct with S capital, okay, underscore struct with I don't know, std or my struct, right? So you want that to be text replaced, and this would interfere with the standard also because underscore struct with a capital S may have been used somewhere inside a vectors containers something, and you don't even know, we don't know. So that would actually just replace your token in the standard library, and you would see lots of errors. I've seen Marshall Clough, again, library maintainer, talk about these kind of things. Every now and then he gets some defect on the standard library, which is not because of the standard library, it is because of the use in a way which is non-standard.
So in one of the code, I came up around something like this on hash define. So they wanted to test the class which has some private functions and public functions. They wanted to unit test these private functions. So how to do that without changing, like, private to public? So what they did is basically defined hash define private to public. So I was looking into the code, like how this code is getting tested, how this function is getting called. Here it is mentioned private. I'm like, I'm missing something. Then I went to the who has written the code. But like how this function is getting called. Then he showed me, yeah, there is this make file. Then when we are kind of building this, we are passing has defined private for that particular file to public. I was like, oh my god. Yeah.
This is the reason why we say avoid macros.
Yeah.
All right. That's it on this point, I guess.
Mahendra, that was in the production code.
Yes. Production code. Yes.
Oh,
The complete. It's complete VP.
we test in production, don't we? Okay, good. Looks like it's a good time to take the next question. Anybody?
I just had a trailing point to what Mahinder started, right? Using macros. So we try to avoid using macros to generate token names like function names and variable names, because there is this, I'm not sure if it's very important for others, but there is this factor called grepability, right? So you need, if you're especially for beginners, if you have a large code base and you can't figure out what on earth is going on, so the first tool is you just find Control F and you find throughout the code base where is this variable being used. And now if it's being generated by a macro or something like that, right? So you'll never get hold of where that variable is. So it's actually very discouraging for those kind of people. So, and it's not even for just beginners, it's like it just reduces your code's readability. You have to look up where the macro is and all the stuff. So we try to avoid. I mean, so I'm just using the word try because yeah, we do sometimes, uh, but that's usually frowned upon in a code base if you're using macros to generate token names like variable names or function names. Don't do that. Try to avoid it.
So I guess at this point, maybe we can just look at some alternatives to macros. And if you're able to think of some, please pitch in, because macros can be so many things. So starting with the problem which you mentioned, that I hope everybody is aware that you can join text and create new words in macros. And that's how you get new variable names. But how to not do this? First of all, for Indralil, your point, I guess, if the same way, if every occurrence of that code uses the variable in the same way, which is via the macro, let's say gen name xyz comma xyz abc, then I guess it comes back to grepability, although it is so
It's a
intelligent.
roundabout way to get to gripability.
So how to generate? Generating new names, that's a difficult problem to solve by not using macros. Do we have some tips and tricks here?
So in our VP domain, we generally come around this problem many times, because what happens in VP, there will be, I mean, in the hardware, there will be registers, and sometimes there will not be a single register, it will be like multiple register. Just might be underscore 0, underscore 1, underscore 2. And when we generate a code for that, it will be different classes for that one, because we don't know the layout might change in future. So we don't want to have it as the same layout, even though as of now it is the same layout. So generally, this is like a practice where people do generate the code using this hash define and macros. But now people are taking an extra step, and what they are doing, provide this as a kind of write a simple Python script, provide basically some input to that Python script, and that Python script will generate all these let's say functions or the definition of functions. We basically called it as a code generation part. So because at the end what happens, if you compile the code with the macros as well, the number of symbols getting generated is the same, right? It is just it's not getting shown there. So instead that you just say, okay, this is the header files, or this is the cpp file, this is auto generated from using this version of specifications, and then use it. So nowadays we are kind of following this approach, having another layer of code generation, so that at least when it comes to C++, yeah, we will know that, okay, this symbol is coming from auto generated code might be, and yeah, here is this file. Now that generation might even happen at let's say build time as well, right? Or you do a generation first and integrate and do the development, anything is fine.
Yeah, we do something similar. So we use JavaScript to generate C++ code. So we also, I think we named it API gen module in our code. So there again, yeah. So the only thing is that and we also, so the thing is that since it's generated code, so we place it in a separate folder. So it gives an inkling of like it's something like dist or something like that. So it gives an inkling as to, okay, this code is probably generated, and we have like we also auto generate that at the top of the head file, that okay, this is auto generated code generated via some script or something. So people get an idea that okay, maybe where to look for how this code is being generated. So that's one way.
Can you share what your what's your starting point is, and based on which you generate the code?
So so we basically in the JavaScript code, what we do is we create like we have JavaScript abstractions around like a header file, what's a header file, what's a source file, right? And then within those we have JavaScript abstractions for creating classes. Like okay, you need to generate this class, you need to have getter and setter for this. So it's not like for usual regular code, it's mostly kind of boilerplate code that we need, right? So sometimes you need getter setter and like getting the name of that class and those kind of things. So it's usually for done for this kind of code.
Which means every class of your code base would have that?
No, not every card, not every class. I mean, it's not. I would say it's around like 40% of a code base is generated like that. The rest 60 is what we usually write.
So in our case as well, Ankur, so we have this, we are dealing with hardware. So all the specifications of the hardware IPs are written somewhere in a structural format. That might be XML, someone uses IPExec, open source format, or some uses their own proprietary format. There the complete hardware is kind of specified that what are the register, what is the layout of the register, what is the bit size of register, whether it is you can read it, whether you can write it. So if you want to avoid the writing it, then you can generate some code if someone tries to write that code. And then all these IPs are basically connected with the connections. That connection is also specified. So you can just write the complete framework to generate this complete virtual platform in one go, and then whatever is the functionality you want to implement, behavior aspect, not just like read write, for example some state machines triggering some algorithms in that, and then we basically override the functions, or basically we uh, use the inheritance heavily here. Whatever the generated classes are there, we write our own base class, derived classes, implement the functionalities there, something like that.
It would be some kind of some definition, and then you create based on.
Yeah, it's the same actually, even in our case, that we, so mostly these classes that we generate, as I was referring, like getter, setter, name, and these kind of things. So these are just the data structures that then is we manipulate on these data structures using the code that we actually write, like not the non-generated code. So
Yeah,
so
so
they use,
if you need getters and setters, wouldn't you make that public?
yeah, so we add those, so during the code generation itself we add that public, so that's written into the file via the script, via the generating script.
So making the member public would not need you to have any getters and setters?
No. So we have getter and setter. The members are private. So it's like, let's say there's a string member, right? So you have it as a private member, but you expose getter setter to access, like set the string or get the string. Those
That's the
kinds of
same
things.
as public then. Why do it this way?
Yeah. So
Just asking.
one is that the usage, right? So you can at least, one problem with having, like, it's like if you have getter setter, then just expose it as a public thing. So one problem that with that is to keep track, because using that variable is just like getting the class like foo dot x is equal to something, right? So better than that is you at least know that from where the x is being set, or from where it's being get. So because you can generate like call stacks, and you can track, okay, this is where it's being accessed from, you can trace the exact points. So that makes it easier rather than exposing it just publicly.
Really? Can you not look for foo.x instead of getx?
The usage of it is in multiple places. So I think that, I mean, that's my personal opinion, but yeah.
Yeah, for our use case actually, yeah, just to add on that, our use case is not like just a getter setter. In getter setter we have to manipulate that, okay, we want to do some left shifting, some right shifting, mask some bits, and all this information is available. So yeah, I mean we can't have normal public things there available.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's the representation internally is a little different than just a field. So,
Yeah, basically you will have a register, let's say 32-bit register, and then it will have some bit fields. Now you want to retrieve a particular bit field, you need to do these bit operations, right? Or at least you need to have that structure kind of thing and use the bit fields in the struct. Something like that you need to do. For that we generate all these codes.
good. Okay, so the other thing which I was thinking about was the reason to use macro to generate names would be to have different data types or whatever. So maybe you might be thinking templates there in order to solve your problem. Because if you're generating names of functions where str to l, str to ul, str to ull, and that's what you're doing, then number one, um, just overloading would help, and you don't need new names. First of all, this is a C backlog that comes into C++, and uh, and the other part is if overloading is not the one, and you really need some differences in the different data types, etc., or something, then maybe you're looking at templates. So your function f with int is totally a different occurrence than f with float. So that would also generate new types, and you still use it as f. And with the right type, it will be looked up automatically, etc. Type safe. The other part is using functions as macros, where you use, let's say, something like less than or greater than or min or max is something that I keep on seeing. And again, you're not assured that the data type matches and you have used it the right way. You're aware, right? Like that if you have function min, x and y being passed, your usage of x and y inside the code, inside your code, should be with x and y within within the round brackets, because what the user has passed is not just a variable x, but he has passed you something like database.connect status, and you don't want to connect two times if you have used the variable two times internally. You don't want to call the same function because it's text replacement. It would end up calling database.connect two times. And so that's something that hits.
The usual example to break down that code easily is like passing x plus plus and y plus plus into the min macro. So that so and actually if you go to the GCC, I think where it has used this tokenization, where it's mentioning the tokenization of the not the tokenization, the token pasting string, right? So there I think in one of the docs it actually mentions this example. So they internally, I mean, just as a workaround, they have suggested that within your macro, create a temporary variable, store that temporary variable, and then do the operation on those variables, so that you don't end up basically like your case connecting to the database twice or incrementing the variable twice. So don't have side effects that are like very surprising at the end.
Yeah, that makes you write a multi-line macro, which is another beast.
Yeah. And yeah, and I think best way is just get rid of all these min and max macros and use whatever is there in HTML directly.
Or write a function. Actually, you might have a need for a function. You don't have to make it a macro. You can just make it inline. It's a small function, and it will be inline by the compiler.
Correct.
Maybe even eliminate it completely if it's not needed. And the very standard example is the const. A const variable can definitely replace all the macro, and the compiler gets to decide whether it even allocates any memory for the const or not. And otherwise it will be equivalent to using a macro.
You're talking instead of const, we can go to const expeditely, right? Variables.
A const variable is would be a good replacement for a macro, but you can make the const expert point.
No, so you're talking about macros like hash define number of students, let's say,
Exactly.
for that one, right? So
Yeah.
then why not to use const expert? Why to use const even?
If you know the value, a const int number of students equal to 100 would work everywhere.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you are using hash define number of students, then you will always have the value knowing, right? It will not be computed one.
Correct.
So it will be a compile time constant, basically. It can be like basically treated as a
because it is
compile
also
time constant.
compile time constant, so replace with const expert.
But I have seen uses where one macro is defining many other macros.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
so you have the entry points where you have 5 things provided, and the real use in our code base, unfortunately we have to replace it, but we have not done that yet, is a defining a hash map based on a macro. There is a hash define which does everything, and it defines many functions like hash underscore insert, hash insert underscore find for your data type. So it uses some parameters, creating names, etc. But this is clearly missing the abstraction of a hash map with a templated type, right? That's all you want. And so in this case, there are some variable and tokens which are coming from the first macro and used as a constant inside the other macro. So that's the kind of a use case. Sorry, I was not very clear about it, maybe. So if you have any calculation, which then prompts you, once you go into macro land, prompts you to write more macros for doing the calculation, etc. But it might end up happening at runtime. You never know. To force that, I guess const expr is the right thing. If you have just a value, then const has always been there. But if you want to compute something at init time, etc., based on some other different provided values or maybe reading a configuration, you can do that in const expr. So not const expr is totally compiler, I'm sorry. In the const, you can even read, while your binary is initializing, you can read some, let's say a file, a configuration, and then based on that, and then your const is there. In the other part, if it's a return of a function, it can be a const like that. But if you have everything available, but it's still a calculation and it is messy, at compile time, you know exactly what to do, then you can use a const expr. And it is a better constant. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions somebody's wanting to raise and discuss? So if not, I'll go back to the list and maybe pick one. What happens when exception is thrown from a constructor or destructor? Any of you uses exceptions? I do very less, but
Very less.
Same, very less.
Very less.
yeah. Somehow it is a.
I probably used it only when studying exceptions about exceptions. That's the only point I think I used. I mostly used for debugging, like throw exceptions
Throw exception.
and throw exceptions.
So we can be quick on this one. What happens when you throw an exception in a constructor or a destructor?
Quick answer. Stack unwinding. I mean, is there something else that the interviewer was looking for? I mean, if that's the answer, yeah, I think I would just go with that.
Yeah, I guess. But how about, so I'm sure there is further qualification to the question, maybe.
Yeah, so for example, you are in a destructor, specifically take a case of destructor, and exception is thrown, and then there are some resources which is basically not fit. What is the state of the object now? An exception is thrown. It is completely destructed. It is partially destructed. Can we use it once again? Can we call destructor once again? And what to do now?
That's why they say don't throw exception from destructor, just to avoid that entire use case altogether.
Yeah. Destructors must be no throw, right? No except.
No except. Yeah.
And in case of constructor, just a similar, sorry, if the destructor point is closed. Mahendra, you want to add something?
No, that's it.
But is it an undefined behavior? I think so, right? If you throw from a destructor.
I'm not sure. It should be, but yeah, I think we have to look it up in the standard that what's the exact thing that they mentioned.
I think there was some change in 17 or C++20 also around mandating that it is no except or something. Anyway, we need to go back and find that out. Maybe we can chat about it on Discord. Coming to constructor, if you have a similar case that you constructed and allocated 1 or 2 or 3 items and then you ran into an exception, That would be, yes, it would unwind the stack, but what about these resources?
Yeah, I mean, like, I have a question. I don't know the answer. Now this half half things are kind of constructed. Now stack unwinding is happening. Then whether the destructor will get called or it will not get called for that particular object. Right, you are going out of scope. Let's say there.
Destructor cannot get called because the object is not fully constructed.
Concept. So I think this is nice homework for every one of us to go and look into what happens when constructor and destructor is throwing exceptions.
I guess if you have managed memory, which is I'm talking of memory here, but managed resource. Let's say you have a unique pointer to a memory block, and then you throw, it will be cleaned up because of the throw. As you leave the constructor, those elements will be cleaned up. And I think that is the basic exception guarantee thing. So if you have member 1, 2, 3, which have done some dynamic allocations, etc., some resources grabbed, then their destructors would be called if you're throwing from the fourth member while allocating or creating the fourth member. And that's why it is very important to not do things all by yourself. You should leave things to these specialized objects like unique pointers, etc. And they would themselves take care of the resources. And that's a very good property to have. It also is your move towards the rule of zero. If you have all members which are responsible for their own resource management, and they will clean up after themselves in the destructor, you have nothing to write in your destructor. And that's the rule of zero.
Rule of zero is actually you don't write anything. No constructor, no destructor, no move assignment, move constructor, no move assignment operator, and no copy assignment operator. Like basically all the 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you basically go from rule of 5 to rule of 0. That's the desired part. But yeah.
Exactly.
Also, I pinged in the chat what the standard mentions regarding throwing exception from destructor or constructor. So it will actually destruct whatever is whatever sub object, whatever like sub members it has. It spec mentions that actually.
Yeah, it is guaranteed, right? Okay. Interesting. What is stack unwinding is also a question.
Must have been a follow-up question to answer that the guy provided before.
So in fact, in the list, it is the one before this question.
Okay.
There was one about move I had seen. Yeah, I see it now. It would be interesting to discuss, but we are almost out of time. But stack unwinding is the functions. Yeah, Indranil, you want to?
So basically, like all the objects that have been created in whatever order they have been created, they will be destroyed in the reverse order during stack unwinding. So it's basically, as the name suggests, stack. So whatever has been pushed onto the stack, the last, that will get popped out the first. So I think that's how I would go about explaining stack unwinding, and maybe add with few example that what would happen, like code snippet kind of thing.
Yeah, so you essentially come out of the function.
Right.
the stack goes up and you actually unwind, so you come back down. I might be wrong when I say goes up, because
Yeah.
implementations, different implementations either go up or they go down.
And maybe add a unique pointer for bonus points to explain like why unique pointer should be used.
Why unique pointer should be used?
I mean, like to explain the concept of RAII, right? So I think just add that as a bonus to probably impress the interviewer.
See,
This is also called driving your interview, interview yourself. So if you talk something, you know that, okay, you have good knowledge about smart point, unique pointer. So you are taking him to your territory. And if you are able to do that successfully, then you are controlling your interview. Instead of interview, you are controlling it for you.
I see people, throwing up concepts in the air, evidently for us to discuss in that area. It's fun.
But it should be, you should throw only when you know that, okay, if you are in that territory, you can answer the questions. I have seen candidates who just, knows the keyword. They, for every question, they throws up the keyword. And if you just, ask about that keyword, they don't know anything then. That is very bad then.
Yeah, this is why the questions always unfold one after the other. And so what if this? And what about that? So it's always like that. And in fact, if you see, life is also like that. You made an app, you made a product, and it's not going to just say that and give me one more and give me. So we are all users of software ourselves, and we see the evolution of software, and that's a reality. So creating a software for change is definitely a good thing to do generally anyway. All right. It is 12. I guess any last point somebody want to discuss?
Maybe since you already touched it, so I would just like to mention there are a lot of misconceptions around STD move. And I think the committee itself is to blame because the name, right, STD move, it is very misleading. It doesn't do anything. It just like I often ask them like, how would you implement STD move? So they go about destructing and then recreating and doing all the stuff, which is not what STD move does. So there's a lot of misconception around that. I think it could have been properly named better. Like just get an R value reference or something like that. But yeah.
Uh, yeah.
And STD forward. Same.
Yes. I guess these are the points to discuss next time we meet in the chat, I guess, because we won't do justice to them right now.